Hello and good evening. Welcome back to Arsenal Analysed on Father's Day. So a very happy Father's Day to anyone that is celebrating, and for everyone else, I hope you're just enjoying a regular good old Sunday evening with me and my two guests to discuss, well, something of a hot topic within the Arsenal community. Transfer window has started in the usual fashion. The mill is in full swing. And I'm joined this evening by two guests to help digest how Arsenal should spend the reported £200 million that we have to spend this summer. And joining me first is Keith. How are you doing this evening, my friend?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me back on again, by the way. Father's Day being what it is. Busy day. One thing I've done recently, you see those memes say, tell me you're old without telling me you're old. I've recently become part of a lawn bowls team, and we've just signed up to the local winter floodlit league. So yeah, I've taken up like old man bowls, not like 10-pin bowling, but on the greens and all that. So that's all right. I'm enjoying that. But that's about it for me.
Good. And we also have Tony, who was with us a few weeks ago as well, becoming more of a regular on the show now that we've started to do it on a Sunday evening. How are you, my friend?
Ask me that question again when the transfer window's over, and I'll give you a positive answer at that point. to be honest, so right now I'm actually surprised I haven't turned into a full-blown alcoholic, because I actually feel more stressed out during this window than I have during most of our finals and things like that. So, but yeah, other than that, I'm great, man. Thanks for having me on again, and an absolute pleasure to be over here with this insanely attractive man known as Keith. So yeah.
Good. I'm glad that you can join us this evening. And you're not wrong. The transfer window can be very, very stressful, especially when the club decide to go out of their way to make us all really excited with the players that we're linked with. And it hasn't happened yet. So hopefully we can all still be smiling in a few weeks. And well, we've got a few players that we want to talk about this evening. Keith and Tony are going to be sharing their expert knowledge on a few players before they go ahead and tell me how they would spend £200 million if they were in charge of Arsenal, if we were the Edus and Artetas of Arsenal Football Club. But as mentioned, there are three players that I want to talk about this evening. I'm sure most of you can probably guess who they are. Three players that have been most hotly linked with Arsenal so far this summer. And we may as well get probably the biggest one out of the way first, Declan Rice. If you haven't heard of him or you haven't seen the rumours, you've probably been hiding under a rock. So Declan Rice, phenomenal player in my opinion, an absolute level raiser in terms of what he could bring this Arsenal side. And to no surprise, being linked with various top European clubs. Keith, before we go into maybe any kind of stats on Declan Rice and the reasons for sort of like why you like him or don't want him, what's your sort of general opinion on Declan Rice as a player?
Complete midfielder. Absolutely complete midfielder. And as you correctly said, if anyone's not heard of him, they must have been living under a rock. Because I did have a look at some stats yesterday or earlier today. And when you go on Google, you only need to press the D button, and Declan Rice is top of the SEO. But yeah, he's the one. He is the absolute game changer for us. We'll drill into stats and such things in a little while. But his personality seems right as well. I know Arteta and Edu, obviously the first thing they're looking for is like the person who can play and fulfill the role. But the personality and the character of the actual human being it seems to be every bit as important. Why they do the due diligence.
Yeah.
It takes, a long time to find the right recruits. But he seems to be the right sort of person as well. It's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on there about character. From what I've read in terms of other professionals, they only have good things to say about him and describe him as a hungry top professional himself. So it's no surprise why Arsenal are interested in him from that point of view. And Tony, again, same question to yourself before we really kind of get under the skin of why Arsenal want Declan Rice. What are your sort of general thoughts on him as a player?
Yeah. In my particular case, I pretty much have been living under a rock for the past couple of days, mostly because I've been trying to get away from all the rumors and all the news. There's probably the number one thing that really stood out to me, other than the fact that obviously he does play in the England squad, is that he was also the captain for West Ham. So he's going to have not just a lot of skill, but he also has a lot of leadership, and he's going to bring in that sort of experience to our mid. He is, as Keith said, a very much complete midfield player. He is spectacular. Anyone who has seen him play in the Premier League knows exactly what he's fully capable of, and I really, really have my heart set on this signing. So I'll be sorely disappointed if it doesn't go through. But yeah, and with the possibility of us losing certain midfield players, when we know Xhaka is pretty much gone.
Yeah,
probably going to be another possibility. We need to have not just depth in the mid, but we also need to add the quality. Declan Rice screams quality all the way through. So that's why my fingers are so tightly crossed right now. The blood's rushing out of them.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you about the whole kind of hope behind Declan Rice. And over the last few years, there's probably only kind of like one or two players that I've really and shouldn't have got emotionally attached to, and it's not worked out for one reason or another, and then I'm proper bummed out for a few weeks until we make a sign-in then. So I'm trying my best, but when you're linked with a player of that quality, and from an England's fan point of view as well, him being English, it just adds a little something to it. So I really, 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 really hope it happens. But let's try and get under the skin of why Arsenal might be linked with Declan Rice and why you guys are particularly keen on Arsenal signing him. Keith, I know you kind of went away and done some research and found some stats on certain players that we're going to talk about today. So what can you tell us about Declan Rice as to why Arsenal and why you want him to sign for the club?
Well, I'm probably not telling you guys anything that you haven't already researched and already aware of. But the thing that strikes me is like he's 24 years old, so he fits the mould, the criteria of the profile of players that we've been looking at the last couple of years.
Yes,
but he's 24. He's already got 42 England caps. Made his debut for England, I think 19. Debut for West Ham 17. And I was thinking a lot about the money they're asking. Some people say it's a lot. I personally don't think it is when you look at the market as it is at the moment and other players. Caicedo, you're looking at, the rumours are that could be a £100 million signing.
Yeah.
But I was looking at his game time, and over the last 5 seasons, he's averaged 35 games a season. And he's actually, looking at the minutes played, he's played 283 hours in the Premier League already at the age of 24.
Wow.
And we all know that he's Premier League proven.
Yeah.
And all right, he's not got many goals in him, but you look at the style of play that he's been playing under. That's not been part of his game. But I was interested to look at how he breaks things up from a defensive point of view. And I'll have to put my spectacles on for this to refer to my note. Last season, in 37 games, tackles or interceptions, 142 in the entire season. The only one who outdone him was Caicedo with 156. When you compare Declan Rice with someone like Rodri, he had 100 tackles and interceptions. Thomas Partey, 98. But the thing that really strikes me is not just the breaking up of the play, but his passing percentage is literally 0.5% lower than Thomas Partey's. And when you look at the style and the formation that Rice has been playing in compared with Thomas Partey, his passing percentage, I think, if we get him to the carpet, that will skyrocket, and we'll see a lot more from him attacking wise.
Absolutely. No, you're spot on. I've got all sorts of facts and figures that I'm saving for one of my usual player analysis videos, so I'm not going to give too much away during this show. That's why I brought Keith and Tony on. But you do make some very, very good points there, Keith, with regards to Rice, especially from a progressive point of view in midfield. And when you look at the system that he's played in under Southgate for England as well, definitely much more defensive as a double deep pivot with Calvin Phillips in some of the previous international tournaments. And again, like you said, West Ham, who, yes, the season before last, they finished in the top end of the table and they were a much more possession-based team. Compared to this year, they haven't been. They've gone long periods of the game without the ball. And like you said, it makes you wonder if he comes to the carpet and plays as a 6 or plays as an 8, and we've got a lot more possession, how do those numbers change? How does this goal contributions change as well? We only have to look at Granit Xhaka as an example of how his position changed this year and how much more Arteta has managed to get out of him because of that. So it certainly poses a very interesting hypothetical question. It just depends on whether or not we can get him here to get the question answered, which I'm hoping we bloody can. Tony, what did you find in your research?
Yeah, he's probably the number one thing that did impress me the most is I was checking on the interceptions. He's got 1.73, which actually puts him in the 95th percentile, which is ridiculously high up. Right-footed, very, very good defensively. He is versatile, which is excellent, but I think it might very well be his defensive stats that would be somewhat the more impressive one. With his clearances, he's at 1.59, so that would be in the 83rd percentile. And his aerial duels, it was 1.02, so about 63rd percentile. So not too bad. It might not necessarily be the best, but we've seen far worse. Now, when it comes to his pass completion, the progressive passes, progressive carries, he's actually all in the 80s percentile, which is also very, very high. And that really shows his abilities in a defensive sense. Honestly, it's like our back line. It's sort of like the accelerator pedal that's on a car. And it kind of gives us the push and the drive while the midfield itself is sort of like the steering wheel, which is it kind of what controls the flow when we're actually on the mat. I think that Rice, he's going to really fit into Arteta's system with a defensive boost, but as well as the other versatility that it could bring to the squad and in the mid, while he does help to set us up for strong counterattacks. So the good thing is he's got quite a lot of years of experience already, and like I said, he was captain for West Ham for a while, so he understands what it is to be a leader, not just a leader, but also an effective leader when he's on the pitch. I know that goal scoring is not in his main repertoire, but it doesn't necessarily have to be for what he's being brought in for. But regardless, I think that Arteta is going to find the correct and the most efficient way to put him to use when he's in this position. And again, the versatility that he has is particularly useful.
Absolutely spot on with the versatility. One of the things that Arsenal have done over the last few years under Arteta is every player that we've signed is able to play 2 or 3 different positions or roles. It doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon, whether it's Declan Rice or a number of the other players that we're being linked with. And interestingly, again, like you said, he is a captain. And when you look back at a lot of the players that we have signed recently, a lot of them have been captains for their club sides or even their international sides. So we're signing more and more leaders, which reminds me of the Arsenal of old, where we had 5 or 6 captains, not this whole 5 or 6 captains chosen by the players, 5 or 6 real proper captains like the Arsenal of old. And it just seems like we're adding more and more. But yeah, great points made as per normal from Tony. Now, the next 2 players, funnily enough, we were supposed to do this show last week, but due to technical issues, we were unable to go ahead. The next 2 players would have been 2 very different players, actually. We were planning to speak about Caicedo, who seems to be off to Chelsea now, and Cancelo, and things seem to have gone fairly quiet on that front. So we've had to change things. And I think the next one has certainly caught a lot of people off guard, me included. I'm sure those of you who are watching will probably agree and let me know your opinions on the matter as we start talking about him. But Kai Havertz really come out of the blue, potentially the forward player that Arsenal are being rumoured with, certainly has picked up some speed over the last 4 or 5 days. And again, just like last time, before we jump into under the bonnet, I suppose, of what makes him a good player and why we might be linked with him, Keith, what are your general, without giving too much away, what are your sort of general thoughts on Kai Havertz as a player?
Well, you know my feelings about Chelsea. And initially, I hated the idea, and the same as everyone else, like, where the hell's this come from? But then the more I've thought about it, you look at how Chelsea used to palm their players off on us 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
We're getting, the old Chelsea spies, and it never really worked out. Even Peter Cech wasn't, the best signing ever. But then you look at January, we've got Jorginho. I know he's probably surplus to requirements for them. But he's done a good job, I think. Anyway, I think he was actually a really good signing. And Havertz is one of those players. I never really paid a huge amount of interest to him, and I actually thought he was a lot older than he is. But I've done the old looking at YouTube videos. The ones where they can make your dog look like Ronaldinho. But there's lots of things I like about him. And going back to your comment about Arteta likes players who can fulfil 2 or 3 different roles, it's almost a little bit like the total football of the Dutch side of the 70s. And I'm absolutely fully 100% into this signing, not as much as Declan Rice, but, not far off, because he can fulfill an awful lot of roles. There's talk about filling the Xhaka role. Not too sure about that, but I looked at some of his footage from back in his Leverkusen days, and there is evidence that he can play that role, and he moves the ball very, very quickly. He can play anywhere across the front, and he's quick, and he's strong, and he's got vision. So I think if we can get him back to being Leverkusen Havertz as opposed to last season's Chelsea Havertz, it's a great signing. Not keen on the money they want for him, but we can drill into that in a little while. But yeah, all for it.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping we can take advantage of the situation, because he's got 2 years left on his contract, and he does want to leave as well. And normally when it's a player driving that, it seems as though the price can tend to be a little bit lower. But you make some great points there in terms of his versatility, and I'm definitely on board with bringing the Bayer Leverkusen Havertz to Arsenal. 38 goals and assists over 2 seasons, playing as a inside forward on the right hand side. So if he can bring that sort of form, if Arteta can get that sort of form out of him, and we know he can get the best out of players, we've seen it before. Hopefully, just hopefully, that's the Havertz we see if he does sign for Arsenal. Tony, same for you. Just before we get into the meat and potatoes of why Havertz might be a good signing, what are your sort of general opinions on him as a player?
It's sort of the same thing. Again, just like how Keith just finished mentioning, there's a whole Chelsea vibe about him, and I am a little bit skeptical about Chelsea players because we know what's happened before. But taking a little bit of a closer look into some of the stats that he's been producing for Leverkusen. Again, the Bundesliga is different than the Premier League, so we don't know how exactly he'll be able to fare over here. We do know sort of how he was when he was over here, but it wasn't. I just personally think that maybe it could have been due to mismanagement, which is why he sent out to Leverkusen. I do like his age because he's not excessively young, but he hasn't quite gotten up there into the age factor where it's going to start to slow him down. He's a 24, I believe it is.
20,
so yeah. I would say that physically he's pretty much at what football will be sort of close to the prime, right around that age. So I think that we could get quite a bit out of him. Especially he is a midfielder. He's more of an attacking midfielder, which would be good because if we can secure him, then we could utilize him alongside Rice or even Odegaard. So I do believe that he could be very, very useful to Arteta's system when he comes in. And I think that the experience that he's gained at Leverkusen, combined with the experience that he's already gotten here, within the Premier League, I think Arteta is going to be able to get the best out of him. And we know that Arteta does have the capability of doing exactly that with players that normally, you really wouldn't bet too much of an eye on. So I'm excited, a little bit reprehensive, a little bit scared, obviously, because
Yeah.
Chelsea. But realistically, I think this has the potential maybe to be one of the best signings that we would get from a rival club, especially from Chelsea. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm expecting decent things if we can manage to close this deal out.
Yeah, and so am I. And you're absolutely spot on with the mismanagement side of things that you mentioned. And in addition to that, one thing we do need to look at is that over the last sort of 2 years, whilst he's been in the Premier League before entering his prime, Chelsea have had 5-6+ managers during that time, which means he's had to get used to God knows how many different systems playing in different roles. And maybe, just maybe, he needs not only some love from the same manager, but that consistency to really get into a rhythm. We only have to look at this Arsenal team from last season until we got a few injuries. The team picked itself week in, week out. Every player knew their role, and we had that consistency. And to be honest, he hasn't realistically had that. If we really look and strip it all back, I don't think that he's had that across all of the various different managers that he has played for. And even during that sort of time, he scored some big goals in some big games. He scored arguably their most important goal in the last 3 years, when he won the Champions League for Chelsea, which no one expected at the time. So they've already made their money back on him just from that goal alone. Anywho, Keith, I'm sure just like Declan, you've done some research on some exciting numbers and stats as to why we should be buying him or maybe why we shouldn't be. What have you got for us?
I actually purposely didn't look at any stats on this guy. I know that you love your stats, but I decided to go more with the eye test with him.
Okay, works just as well.
Potential roles that he could fulfill. Now, we all know we need somebody to lighten the load on Bukayo Saka. We know that we might potentially need somebody to lighten the load on Gabriel Jesus, Eddie Nketiah if he's part of the team, and if Balogun goes. The things that really strike me, there's is one of those you look at him and you're not sure if his personality's right, if he's got the guts about him to be into a fight and what have you.
Yeah.
And the thing that strikes me is it's clear that Arteta really, really wants him. And I get a little bit of a Trossard vibe about this one because when we got him, it was completely under the radar. No one was expecting it. There were stories about Trossard having attitude problems, falling outs with De Zerbi and what have you.
Yeah.
And you look at what he did in the half season that he's been with us. It was a masterstroke. And I kind of see the same a little bit with Havertz, as we alluded to earlier, if we can get the Leverkusen version of him. But as you correctly said, he's a winner. He's scored the most important goal for Chelsea very, very recently. He's a Germany international. He was playing for Leverkusen as a 17-year-old. I think he made his debut for the national side not long after that. So the guy, he's been around for a long time. He is experienced. And there's some people have said there's a bit of an RVP vibe about him, like about his build, his stature, and how he plays. And I wasn't really too, when I first heard that, I thought, not sure about that. But when going back and watching him play, there really, really is. Obviously, I wouldn't like to see him be awesome, then leave in the same way that RVP did.
Yes.
But I just think, again, he's one of these players, he can fulfill an awful lot of roles. Probably 4 or 5, at least 5 roles he's capable of fulfilling for us. And, I'm actually a little bit excited about this one. Just want to see it get over the line. I don't want to see us pay 70 million for a player that Chelsea paid 75 for, 3 seasons ago. But then obviously you've got the Premier League tax. I believe Real Madrid kind of tested the waters last year with a £45 million bid. If we weren't playing in the Premier League, I'd say he's a £45 million investment. But we know it's going to be higher than that because of who we are, who they are, and we play in the same league. But 60 million, I think, gets this over the line.
Yeah, and it's not the worst amount of money to be paying either, considering the markets continue to inflate since then. He's got his Premier League experience now, and like you mentioned as well, with selling to a Premier League rival. So, yeah, definitely some very, very good points there made, especially with the RVP thing, which I'm assuming what Chippy's on about in the chat.
He knows.
And then AJ brings up a fantastic point as well. I did bring the comment up just a minute ago, but I didn't know that he'd had the second best XG from headers, which is another reason for why I'm assuming Arsenal are looking to sign him in the summer. Because when you look at the Eddie Nketiahs and the Jesuses in the last sort of 10, 15 minutes of a game, we haven't got someone really that we can throw in when we're really kind of throwing the kitchen sink at it, who can be that aerial dominance in the box. It's not like 5-10 years ago. Well, I say 10 years ago, 5+ years ago, when we had a Giroud, for example, with that presence, when you're really trying to nick a draw or nick a win or something like that. So, Tony, what are your thoughts in terms of research now from a Havertz point of view?
Yeah, and financially, apart from the price, which realistically, the way that the market has really been inflated recently, there's really nothing you can do about that. So you can expect that you're going to be paying quite a bit more for some of the players that weren't normally as expensive a couple of seasons back. But realistically, again, he's at 6'3". It's that's a fairly solid height. He's definitely a physical individual in terms of height. Yeah. If there's really only one concern that I would have to mention about him, is just the offside awareness. The fact that he does tend to get caught offside a little bit. Okay. But I think that's something that could be, and it's not really a colossal issue, because that's something that could be worked on as an individual player under, Arteta's leadership. That's not that big of a deal. Now, apart from that, though, his versatility is probably one of the things that caught my eye immediately, because this will allow him for a lot of positional flexibility, because he actually can play as and according to what it says, he could play as a forward, center, and attacking, a mid-center, forward left, or forward right, although he does prefer to utilize the left foot. So that is a massive amount of positions that could be filled up. If we happen to have suffer injuries, which apparently we can't freaking ever avoid our injuries every single season, because we always get somebody. He is defense-oriented. Now his blocks, clearances, the tackles he intercept passes, his pass completion, and his attempts, all of those are actually in the high 80s or the low 90s percentile. That's very, very, very impressive. And it just adds and it shows a little bit more about the flexibility. Also, another thing, which it doesn't really get brought up a whole lot, but his the disciplinary record, it's actually really good, because he's had no red cards for the past 3 seasons, and he only had 5 yellow cards last season. So he might not necessarily have the exact same amount of leadership experience that Rice or Odegaard would bring, but he was part of the championship, the Champions League winning side. So he does have the hunger and the mentality, I think, is really what he's going to be looking for. So I think that's going to be something that's going to fit Arsenal really well.
It is. You both touched on that now, and I think most people who have watched him play or seen him play in a Chelsea side or at international level know the versatility that he can add to this Arsenal team. So it's exciting. One other thing that I don't think anyone mentioned, and apologies if they have, but I think he was described, I can't remember if it was at Leverkusen or under Tuchel, but he was described as one of the best defensive forwards in Europe, and he is the first defender and always was the first defender for the starting 11. And we all know how Arsenal love to press, and we saw how much of a difference there was in Arsenal's forward press compared to City's at the back end of last season. So any way we can improve that to get closer to the way City operate in that forward press is, well, it's good news. Good for me, good for you. Anywho, last player of this section for Player Focus before I get the answers from Keith and Tony on how they would spend their 200 million odd quid on players. And this was probably where we were looking to discuss either Caicedo or Cancelo. Cancelo is obviously going to Chelsea now by the looks of things. And the replacement potentially for around 40 odd million quid is 19-year-old Belgian midfield player from Southampton, who have just been relegated, Romero Lavia. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Keith, what are your thoughts on this youngster?
Well, I have started pronouncing his name as Romeo Lavia just because I think it sounds cool. But I knew nothing about him until I watched him play against us. And I was like, who's this kid? I remember being super impressed with him. What up, Scott? When he was everywhere, literally everywhere. And
yeah,
he's another one. I didn't do many stats on him, but the things I was impressed with, I mean, Man City picked him up proper early in his career.
they did.
He made his debut from when he was 17, but he only made one appearance for them. And I'm a little bit surprised they let him go, to be honest. I mean, I don't know who else they got coming through who's like, but it's just, I don't understand why they let him go so quickly. He was there in the youth team for a season. He was player of the year. I think they won the Premier League 2. And then he was instantly put into the first team squad.
Yeah.
You know, at the age of 17, played one game, I think it was in the FA Cup. And then they've let him go to Southampton. I think he signed a 5-year deal. So he's got like 4 years left on that deal. But again, I did the whole Googling and looking at the YouTube videos. The things with the YouTube videos, it depends what you're looking for. And with a player like him, I wasn't looking for amazing goal scoring prowess or anything. It's, for me, with that role that we're looking at for, it's about breaking things up and moving the ball really, really quickly.
Yes.
And bearing in mind he's 19 years old, I think he scored in his second or third game in the Premier League, made his debut against Spurs. And the things I was looking at is he's so quick. He's absolutely rapid. And I thought he looked quite tall. He looked like Vieira-esque, like 6'2", 6'3".
Yeah.
Apparently he's 5'11". He looks a lot bigger than that, which I think is...
He does. It's a good comment.
Yeah. But it's how efficient he is with the ball. And I don't tend to use the word transitioning that much. It's kind of I'm old and it's one of these new words that comes up. I just like to think of moving the ball forwards. And he's really quick. He's very, very efficient. He doesn't muck about. If there's a pass on, he will play it sharpish. But then you'll often find when he's played the ball forwards, when the ball is received by whoever he's passing it to, he's already ahead of them. So he could be a 6, he could be an 8. I don't know if it was like the dream ticket in the double pivot was him and Declan Rice. It could be one of those where they both kind of fulfill the same role, but they sit in for each other. When one goes, the other one sits in, the way it kind of always used to be with your middle two. But no, I'm really, really excited if we were to get him. And I think 45 million for his potential could be a really, really shrewd signing.
Yeah. Well, he was. There were murmurs, if you remember, in January when we were being linked with a midfielder then before we signed Jorginho. There were murmurs about him and Onana and several other players. I think Bamba was another one, the Portuguese lad, the Italian lad at the Portuguese club. But yeah, he's a very, very good player. The one thing that does scare me when you mention City as well, and I only read this today, I'm sure other people know about it already, but City don't tend to let their youngsters go and put too many buyback clauses in their contracts. Once they're gone, they're gone. But this kid actually does have a buyback clause in his contract, which is valid until the end of next summer.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yes, I didn't know that until today. And you've seen it before where clubs buy players back so they can sell them on for a profit and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure it won't happen, but that in itself just goes to show, like you said, I don't know why they let him go because clearly there is talent there. I can only assume that, they signed Calvin Phillips, they signed Rodri 2 years ago. The pathway to the first team just wasn't as clear as maybe it once was for him. That's the only thing I can potentially think of. And maybe by letting him go for a few years and buying him back after some experience was maybe the plan, but who knows? Tony, your thoughts on him as a player?
Yes, really similar to what Keith has said. I didn't really know a whole lot about this particular player until I did see him at Southampton. I've seen a couple of videos, just trying to do a little bit of research on him, and it's sort of like he reminds me of a more aggressive, I guess maybe hungrier or more efficient Lakanga to a certain degree. I do like his style of play. I think it would suit us pretty decently. Other than that, I can I haven't seen a whole lot of him other than the fact that he was in the squad that was relegated. But I genuinely really do hope that we manage to bring him to the side, because for the price that they will probably wind up asking for him, it will be superb to have him for that price, because he's essentially raw talent. Is he going to need development? Yeah, he's going to need development just like any other young player that's coming in. And he is very, very, very young. He's just 19. So he's going to have a lot of learning to do. And I think that with the crop of players that we have now, he's going to be able to benefit from that experience and really bring it onto the pitch. But like I said, it's almost like a ball of energy. It just needs to be molded to fit Arteta's system. But I think if we manage to secure him, he's going to be pretty effective over here. He might not necessarily be the shining gem that we're expecting him to be right away. I wouldn't expect that from him from at that young of an age, and being relatively young to the Premier League, in terms of experience. But I think given the amount of time, he's going to prove to be particularly useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, you make some very, very good points, especially with how quickly he's integrated into the first team, because there were rumours flying around today, and there have been over the last few weeks, about Thomas Partey potentially leaving the club. So it might be something that's forced a little sooner than anticipated, or maybe that was always the plan from the very, very beginning. And a few people in the chat have jumped in to let me know that the buyback clause is valid in 2024, which means, thankfully, looks like we've got a bit of a clear run in this summer. So we better get our arse in gear, essentially, to get him signed before someone else takes him off our hands. And AJ mentioned that he was invited to work with De Bruyne at aged just 15, which, as he goes on to say, it does really say a lot about the player. Do either of you have any interesting facts, stats, or figures around Lavia before we move on?
Going back to the thing about KDB, I've read something similar to that this afternoon. Now, apparently, he has a tournament in Belgium, and he invited Pep to go and watch him at the age of 15. So, obviously, he was like, he's classed as a bit of a wonder kid. Now, with this buyback clause, say, for example, we get him this summer.
Yeah.
Does our new contract, does it override the buyback clause that Man City have, or would we have to write that into a contract so we can go in and say, right, we're going to do this, and the buyback is no longer
done?
A thing?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I'm like 99.9% sure. I'm sure someone is probably more clued up on this than I am in the chat, but I am like 99.9% sure that it would then be void. And right, they can't
if we were to get in now, then it's not even a thing anymore.
Yeah, exactly that. Indeed. Absolutely. Tony, anything else to add on Lavia? I think he's a bit of a last minute player that we've thrown in the mix today. So I appreciate that we've not all gone away and done our research and got loads of stats and fancy figures to share with everyone in the chat.
Yeah. There is goal scoring is not really his thing. Obviously he's very, very young to this, because he only had a single goal, no assist during the past season. But again, this is just it wasn't from the best Southampton side. So I don't really think that we or that he had the chance to really bring out his potential during that particular time. And again, the relative youth of his time, when he was there. He is going to have to improve on the aerial duel success rate, which it's fairly low, but it's only at a 7th percentile, so it's not the highest. But I think what we're going to be bringing him in is there's one thing that does impress me, and that was that his blocking percentile was actually at 96. So again, it's just very early to tell exactly what he's going to be capable of. We have to give him a little bit of time. Whether we utilize him in the first squad right away, we really can't say yet, because it's a little bit of a gamble, especially if he's going to be coming on for Thomas Partey, who's probably going to wind up leaving. That said, it's going to be one of those things again where it'll have to be time. You give him the right amount of time with the correct amount of training, especially with the first squad, he's going to gain the experience that he needs. The one thing that really has impressed me, though, from the little bit of time that I've seen, it is that he has a hunger and he has a drive to improve on the squad, and that's something that I think that we'll be able to benefit from.
Fingers crossed, especially given that he's only 19 years old. So much room to grow and so much interest in him already. So that is going to wrap things up for part 1 of the show. And you weren't here for that. These are just some of the players that Arsenal will most likely or hopefully buy this summer. The reason everyone is here is to see, well, the opinions on how Keith might spend £200 million if he was in charge of Arsenal, or Tony. So we are going to do that next. But as Billy says in the chat, if you are enjoying today's show, please do go ahead and hit that like button. It's much, much appreciated from me. Subscribe if you're new around here as well, so you don't miss out on any future shows, because we'll be covering all sorts of different subjects throughout the summer whilst we're all missing football, including videos on certain players that we've mentioned it today. And I think AJ also wants the £200 million that we've just mentioned that we'll be planning to spend in just a moment. Now, there is no sort of prerequisites with this, but I will kind of give a brief outline to the sort of general consensus of what's being reported. And then it's down to Keith and Tony to spend the money however they want, on whoever they want, and whatever positions they want. But generally speaking, when you look at what's being reported in the media and the big boy journalists like Fabrizio Romano, David Ornstein and Charles Watts, for example, general consensus is that Arsenal are looking to buy a right-sided defender, so someone who can play right centre-back or right-back or both, 2 midfield players, ideally a 6 and an 8, and a forward who is versatile, predominantly someone who can provide competition and cover to Saka and maybe at times fill in that forward role, similarly to how Trossard does, I suppose, from the left. So those are the sort of 4 positions that we'll be looking to cover. Realistic signings, I suppose, is one way of kind of putting it. I know some people might say, let's get Mbappe. Not going to happen. Just not going to happen. Keith, I'm sure you've probably been thinking about this since we spoke about it a few days ago. Likewise with yourself, Tony. But who would you sign for each position? And give us a kind of brief outline as to why you would sign those players.
Right. So the central midfielders we've already discussed. They're the ones I would bring in. And by my reckoning, you're looking at 141 million there.
Mm-hmm.
Roughly, with add-ons and don't even get me started. I had to unplug from Twitter the other day, to be honest, after our first bid got knocked back because it was absolutely ridiculous. But I digress. So yeah, that's 140 million there. Now, this is where we have a problem with 200 million, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. So what I'm going to say is the other 59 million we spend on Kai Havertz, and then what we do is we sell, hate to say it, but either of Thomas Partey or Kieran Tierney, bring some more money in, and I would still go for Cancelo. I know it might upset the apple cart with the tactics a little bit, but I think it gives us an extra dimension, which we can probably delve into in another show. So yeah, I've cheated a little bit because I've already spent 200 million on 3 players. But yeah, that's what I would do.
You do make a good point though, because when you look at the 3 players that we're most hotly linked with right now, it would come in at around the £200 million mark, and you know none of them are defenders. And you only have to look at what happened at the back end of last season to see how desperate we are for another right-sided defender. So it's no surprise that we're being linked with, you know, Castagna, Cancelo, and a number of other right-sided
Tommy to be that
centre-backs.
bloke, but he's kind of like a little bit made of glass just lately. Since he's been here, to be honest. You know, I love him to bits, but you've got to look at it and think there's a lot of injuries there. Is there, you know,
yeah,
problem.
He's not quite as old when we signed him, but he just reminds me of the sort of a Cedric type signing. He's more of a kind of stopgap, Castagna, that is. You know, if someone were to get injured and he
I'm
was
not
to come in,
that one, to be honest.
Yeah, to me, it's not yeah, it's not where I want to be. And just before you answer, Tony, this is without player sales. I know Keith cheated a little bit, but this is without player sales because we are actually we're gonna dive into who we would buy with player sales after Tony gives us his answer to the question. But before we do, there's a few answers coming in here with players that people would buy, like Rice, Havertz, and Zubimendi. Another one, very, very good player. We've got the guy's name. I can't pronounce the guy's name. I'm thinking the guy from Ajax. I'm terrible with the pronunciation of names, but he's supposed to be very good. Fresneda is a player that we were linked with in January, of course. Pavard has only got a year or two left on his contract, so that should be really interesting. Gundogan is another one, depending on whether or not he signs his contract at City. All of which there, again, Rice, Havertz, Lavia, the guy's name I can't pronounce, would all be very, very good signings. I'm sure someone's going to tell me how to pronounce it in the chat in just a minute. Henrik Solid, yep, perfect. Okie dokie. Sorry, Tony, we've given you a few extra minutes there. Keith's not going to be happy because I've done this to him before, where I've given other people extra time to think on the
That's
panel,
absolutely fine. I'd actually forgotten about Fresneda, but we'll go back into that another time.
Yes, he's another very, very interesting player because we were apparently really, really pushing for him in January. He's kind of like the right-sided version of Zinchenko. He's been described. So,
you mean notes here is on the wrong page.
Tony, right? Who would you sign for £200 million?
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is his. We laugh at the fact that Keith was saying that he's going to cheat and do the sales, but the thing is, realistically, to sign that many positions, you're going to have to sell a couple of players because it's with everything as high as it is on the market. It's player prices they're not what they used to be. Kind of like how gasoline prices aren't what they used to be. Their fuel prices all around the world are high. So yeah, something like that. Realistically, though, that will be money that would have to be invested into adding depth, and not just depth, but also quality to the squad. And there's the chance that you might have to sign in one player that you weren't expecting, like in this particular case, I think with Lavia. We might not necessarily know a whole lot about him, but if there's a possibility for the quality to be there and you can sign him and bring him on, then yeah, it's going to have to be something that you'll need to do, because unfortunately we've seen how our own quality and how our performances on the pitch suffer when we don't have an adequate replacement for someone who's injured. So that's really why I think that the 200 million would best be utilized to just continue to thicken up the depth with a little bit of quality added in there too. I have the players that I would like to. I'm not going to start talking about that yet, though.
Okay. So, in terms of the 200 million, who would you sign for 200 million?
We have a couple of them. So I'll just go ahead and I'm not going to go through all the stats right away because that's not the part of it yet. But funny thing is I still have Caicedo. The reason that I have not given up on this is because, how is it that I could possibly say this? I won't believe the rumors until I see the pen and the paper meeting. So it's one of those that I'm going to stick to the guns all the way until the very end, because there is still a possibility, even if it's slim, but there's still a possibility that we could get him. So that was for the mid. Another midfield player that I had thought about is actually Gundogan. We know exactly why. He's a little bit older, but that said, the experience that he has is phenomenal. I'm not going to start going into the stats yet, but he's the other one that I have in the mid. For our right back, I would like to get Ivan Fresneda. He was mentioned before. It's still a possibility that it's not the heavy of links anymore, but there's still a possibility. And now for the other position that I had actually signed up, this particular player. Now, unfortunately, all the rumors have just about disappeared all of a sudden, but he had been linked on multiple occasions with us. And I was completely blown away by this player. Is Kaworu Mitoma from Brighton Hove. Absolutely. I mean, he is impressive. Very, very, very impressive if you've read some of the things that this player has done. But like I said, I won't start going into the details right away because I'm going to let the genius Keith start off with that first.
No problem. Keith, any stats information to back up some of the signings? Obviously, we've spoken about 3 of them already in quite depth, but the fourth player that you mentioned in terms of who you would sign as a defender, anything to add?
Do you know what? I did entirely mean to mention Fresneda. It was only when I saw Chippy put it in the comments, I was like, oh man, that's what I forgot to talk about. He's only 18, but you look at how we're playing at the moment. Obviously, Ben White is the first choice right back. And have you seen how quick this lad is? Have you seen him?
Yeah.
Literally unbelievably fast. And as a young lad, when you're playing football, especially as a defender, you're told, your last ditch is to go off your feet. Slide tackle, last gasp thing. Always stay on your feet. Don't make a tackle if you don't have to. He doesn't often need to make a tackle. His awareness of the game is very, very good. Now, I'm not saying he's good enough to come straight into our side, and I don't even know what it would cost to get him, to be honest. But yeah, even though I don't watch a lot of Real Valladolid games, again, he's another one I've seen on YouTube, and I would definitely go in for him. I would also like to say Tony's point about Mitoma. What a player. I believe he's got a degree in dribbling as well. I think
he has.
Literally did a degree in dribbling. And I don't think I've ever seen him have a bad game. And he had Benji on toast when they turned us over. So if you can offer me 300 million for another player, we'll have him as well.
Well, we've got some players to talk about as well when it comes to sales. Stephen Hall here saying 17 million for Fresneda as well. Yeah. I do think that in January the fee was reported to be quite low, like 25 million. And I know Borussia Dortmund are also interested in him, which annoys me a little bit because I think he's only 18 and 19. He's the sort of player that he'll go to Dortmund, play for 3 or 4 years, get all of the experience that he needs, and then he'll go for like 80 million, as Dortmund do with a lot of their players. They pick them up young, turn them into superstars, and then sell them on for a ridiculous profit. But yeah, before we head into the final question of today's show, Tony, it sounds like you had some stats lined up to back up the reason for why you would sign certain players. So just before we jump into that, what do you have quickly to share?
Yeah, real quick now. If anything, I think probably Fresneda and maybe Gundogan. If anything's going to come through for us, it might be one of those two. But with Fresneda, now what I like about him is, he's a right back, and we need a little bit of thickening in that position. But there's a bit of versatility to him because he actually can be utilized as a center back. Now he's very young; he is 18 years old, and the price is actually really, really good. And he still has plenty of room for to gain additional experience. Arteta does rate him quite a lot, and we know that if Arteta does like a player, it's for a very specific reason, and it's a player that we should keep an eye on if Arteta likes him, which he does. His passing game is not the most powerful. It's not necessarily his style. But with that said, his defensive abilities and the prowess, I think that's going to be his selling point, as he does have 6.81 recoveries per 90 minutes and 3.39 tackles with 3.16 clearances within those said 90 minutes. So he has proven himself pretty good in the past with his current club. But I think that Arteta could really bring out the best in him when if we manage to acquire him, and he would really fill in one particular, the right back role very well. And again, with the versatility, he could be used at a center back role. So we've got options to utilize him in the back.
Absolutely. And as Stephen mentions, he's another player that can invert. So it would be interesting to see tactically how Arsenal might line up if we were to use Zinni and Fresneda in the same team. Would he alternate and have someone else at left back when Fresneda plays, so that it's a bit more balanced? Very, very interesting from a tactical point of view. Now, one other thing that we do have to consider, and this is the last question of today's show before we wrap up, is Arsenal will obviously sell players for various different reasons. We've already seen links for the likes of Granit Xhaka, for example, and it looks like we have a replacement hopefully on the way. Thomas Partey is another one with, again, hopefully a replacement on the way. But we also have players that are being linked with a move away from the club where we're not being linked with players in that position, but we would definitely need to bring someone in Otherwise, we would have problems with squad depth as we have done over the last few years. For example, Kieran Tierney, if Zinchenko has been injured or, he's out of form, Kieran Tierney's come in, quality player. We know what we're getting with him. There isn't necessarily a worry at who's playing left back. So he's someone we need to take into consideration. We've also got the likes of Balogun, Patino, Trusty, among other players. So there could be quite a few quid coming in through the door through player sales. So I'm going to come to you first, Keith. When it comes to players leaving, regardless of who it is, who are you worried about leaving, and who would you potentially, apart from the obvious ones that we've already mentioned, like Rice for Xhaka and Lavia for Thomas Partey, but outside of that, are there any other players that you're worried about leaving, and who would you potentially look to bring in if they were to leave?
I really don't want Tierney to leave for the reasons that you just pointed out about if Zinchenko is injured. And even though he's had his times where he seemed to be a little bit made of glass, he's a proper, decent professional. And even when he was overlooked, I can't remember what game it was now, where you'd think he'd be playing in Kiwior, ended up getting the berth on the left side. He just seems, I don't know, I don't want to see him go. And I certainly don't want to see him go to somebody like Newcastle, which is the main name that's been bandied around. Because if he is going there, it needs to be for a lot of money. It needs to be a Premier League tax thing. And that's where Edu still has to prove himself when it comes to moving players out for me, other than the Joe Willock deal, which was a very good deal. So he's one I really, really don't want to see go. I was thinking earlier, actually, talking about Xhaka and Partey. I've compiled a list, if it was a choice of one or the other to go, and this may not be the most popular opinion, but I would rather see Partey go than Xhaka. And if you'll indulge me, I've done pros and cons list. Now, Billy brought up a really good point earlier that I hadn't considered. You've got the legal case, which I've kind of forgotten about that. It could be that there's something going on that we don't know about and something is coming up. But they're both practically the same age. I mean, Partey's basically a school year younger. Leadership-wise, I could see why Arteta, he has got the ump with Partey for the end of the season. That's very obvious. And a player who's an international at the age of 30, you would have expected more from. And it seems like when Rice mugged him, that was when his seasons went, and then all of a sudden he just disappeared. He disappeared up his own arse, basically, when he shouldn't have done. You've got AFCON, which is coming up January of next year. So if Partey stays, that's another 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks that we haven't got him for. Injuries, Partey's had quite a few injuries. I can't really remember too many injuries that Xhaka's had.
No, I can't. I think the season before last, he was out for about a month. But yeah, you are right. In terms of his fitness, he's very good.
Yeah, I mean, he might have damaged his shoulder when he threw the armband down, which we seem to have all forgiven him for somewhat. And the last thing is the pure economics of the situation. Xhaka's got 1 year left. Partey's got 2 years left, which, to my way of thinking, unless we could probably say to Xhaka, just stop on and we'll let you have a free. Thanks for your service. They're looking at, I think, 10 to 12 million for him to go now, whereas we would invariably get a lot more for Partey at this point in time because he's still got 2 years on his contract. So sorry to take over and gate crash there, but those were things I was thinking about and I wanted to get them out. I don't want to see Kieran Tierney go, but I'm actually not as bothered as I thought I would have been about Partey potentially going.
Yeah, Partey's an interesting one for me. When we did the end of season review, I had a question which was surprise package for good and for bad, and Thomas Partey was my surprise package for bad. Not because of the quality that he possesses, because when he's in form, he's unbelievable. He really gets his Arsenal side ticking. But my biggest concern with Thomas Partey was his consistency over the course of a season And because of the 2 or 3 years he's been at the club now, when we've needed him most, he's not been there. And yes, partly, Arsenal are to blame for not having the depth in midfield for when he is injured. But at the same time, you want your best players to be fit over the course of a season. Yeah, you can kind of understand if it's happened in one season. And that's why a lot of question marks are hanging over Tomiyasu's head now because of the injuries he's had over 2 seasons. You can sort of bear it for one season, but for it to happen 2 seasons in a row, 2 years left on the contract, you can certainly see why those questions are starting to be brought up. Tony, what about yourself? There are a number of players, as mentioned, that are being linked with moves away from the club, some more obvious than others. Any areas that you would look to strengthen in? Any areas of sort of real concern outside of what Keith has said with the likes of Partey and Tierney, for example?
Realistically, the one that immediately caught my attention was it was Tierney, because of the fact that the left, unfortunately, our left back is it's a little bit of a thin position right now, which is why we would have really needed to have Cancelo. But realistically, and as strange as it sounds, there's a reason for why I'm not. I mean, obviously, the midfield is something that concerns me. But as I had actually kind of mentioned this to Keith not that long ago, we have a player that we can utilize in the mid, but he seems to have gone under the radar or almost forgotten for some strange reason. And that's actually Emile Smith-Rowe. I know due to the injuries and all that, he's been a player that hasn't been talked that much about. But I really, really do believe that in the mid is it's going to wind up being the position that he's going to wind up at some point taking over, because there's so much competition at our front between Martinelli, between Jesus, Trossard, Saka. There's almost no space for him up there. It won't be where he's going to have the biggest impact. So for me, if we can manage to start utilizing Smith-Rowe again, especially as that box-to-box midfield player, I'll be able to breathe a little bit easier, regardless of whether some of the deals fall through or not. But realistically, other than that, the left is where I will be the most concerned about, which is why I'm hoping that we'll be able to secure, either a Cancelo deal, which we don't really know what's going to wind up happening with that, if we can manage to find another quality player to fill in that particular position.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy, agreeing with you there as well on ESR having a huge part to play in Arsenal's future. And I think we can all agree on that. I'm not even going to ask Keith because I know how much of a fan Keith is of Emile Smith-Rowe. For anyone who watches the channel on a regular basis, you will know how much of a fan Keith is for Emile Smith-Rowe. But yeah, some very, very good points. I don't think it seems as though midfield is as much of a concern for any of us on today's show because of who we're being linked with and how close we are to making those signings, which is good. So I'm very curious to see what happens as the window progresses with the left back role, because outside of Kieran Tierney, Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey, in terms of like real integral first team players, those three are the only at the moment that seem to be linked with moves away. Everyone else who are being linked with moves away, there were some other names in the chat as well, like Lokonga, for example. Those guys, those sort of guys, Tavares as well, those guys being sold isn't necessarily the end of the world. And there was one question in the chat that I forgot to grab. Where is it now? If Xhaka and Partey are both to leave, I think that keeping Jorginho is an absolute must, just so that we've got the depth in midfield. And the reason I say that, and I'm not too sure if you guys agree with me, but if we let Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka leave and we bring in Lavia and Rice, in terms of midfield depth and the drop-off in quality, we're effectively in the same position.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. As we have been in the last 2 seasons, whereas when Granit Xhaka and Partey have been injured, the drop-off will be the same. So I think keeping him for another year, or keeping at least one of the three for another year, is absolutely a must, because we're just shooting ourselves in the foot, in my opinion. So it seems like you're both nodding in agreement. So I'm going to assume that you agree with me. But that is going to about wrap things up for today's show. As mentioned at the very start, something a little bit different to what we normally do. A hot topic There will be another show next Sunday at sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. UK time. So make sure you've got the notification bell button turned on so you don't miss out. Subscribe if you're new around here, especially if you have enjoyed. And if you have done, go ahead and smash that like button. It really, really does help me out. But for now, and the guests, of whom I'm very grateful for coming along and sharing some time with me this evening, thank you very much. And we will catch you in the next one. Stay safe, take care, and see you next week.